Alright everyone, welcome back to another video of Salesforce Makes Sense. This is Himanshu and this is part 2 of the topic sharing settings, wherein we are completely looking at how sharing settings work. In the previous video, we looked at what are sharing settings, what are org-wide defaults, how does role hierarchy come into the picture, what are the different kind of sharing settings or the org-wide defaults that can be configured, right? Private, public read only, public read write, and then we have some special kind of sharing settings like public read write transfer, uh, controlled by campaign, and all of that stuff, right? So we looked at a good chunk of deal in the previous part, and in this part we'll continue our journey of learning sharing settings and understanding how sharing and security works in Salesforce on the record level. And now we'll jump into sharing rules, right? So like I said in the last session, sharing rules is your way of opening up access once you have defined the org-wide defaults as well as the role hierarchy. If I take you back to the graph, this is our graph, right? So we talked about org-wide defaults and then the role hierarchy. Now if you want to do any kind of lateral sharing, when I say lateral sharing, this means irrespective of role, irrespective of hierarchy, right, across your organization. Let's say you want to work with another team member who's working off a different region. That particular team member is not part of your role hierarchy in any which way. You are not related. How do you share records between you and your other user? In these scenarios, sharing rules come into the picture, right? What about based on ownership, based on a certain criteria, that if this particular lead is created by this particular user, or if this particular lead has this particular status value, share this lead record with these three people, or a group of people, or some portal roles, or some subordinates. How do you do that? You create and configure sharing rules. That is where sharing rules come into the picture. All right, so these are basically nothing but custom rules. And where can you write them? If I take a look at our Salesforce org, this is again available under the sharing settings. So if you go to sharing settings, you will see the list of all the objects showing up the internal and the external access, and it also shows you the grant access using hierarchies, right? Down below you'll see that for every object that is available, you have sharing rules that you can write. So you can create a new sharing rule per object. Okay, what does that tell you? That tells you that you can do record level access sharing by writing sharing rules per object. Okay, so for example, if we had to do something around, let's say, the survey, so survey sharing rules can be created. All right, if you have a custom object, let's say you have a custom object called vehicle, so you can create a sharing rule for the vehicle custom object. All right, what will this do? This will only open up access based on what you've already provided, right? So now tell me this, before we jump, let's see what you learned from part one. Okay, so if opportunity is public read write, okay, it's not private, it's not public read only, it's public read write. What does that mean? That means any and every user will be able to see any and every record and also modify it. Correct? So think about this. Once your access is public read write, do you need further access, or do you need to open up access anymore? No, right? Because that's the maximum access you can have. So sharing rules come into the picture or come into fruition only if you have something of a private access, or let's say public read only access. So if it is a private access, you want to enable or enhance or open up the access to public read only or public read write, that's where you can use sharing rules. Okay, so for example, here you have case, which is case is private, correct? So you can open up the case access by writing a case sharing rule. So you can say, for these kind of users, I want this not to be just private, but I want it to be public read only. So what are you doing? You're finding or you're segmenting a set of users who need more access than you have defined on the org level for everyone. So there are some special users who need read access to all the cases, not just their own cases. So you'll create a sharing rule. Okay, let's say you have another use case wherein you have very IP or VVIP people, right? There are 7 people who are part of a public group and they need access to all the cases. They should be able to see them and modify them. So how do you do that? You write a sharing rule and share the case records as public read write to only those 7 people. Got it? Once we see a bit of a hands-on, you'll understand what I'm trying to say. Okay. Let's look into the definition. So sharing rules give specific users greater access by making automatic exceptions to the org-wide default sharing settings, right? If you break this one sentence into four different parts or five different parts, it will be easier to understand. Okay, so sharing rules give specific users. Why specific users? Because we only want to cater to a segment of the users. We are opening up access for a limited set of people. All right. You want to give what kind of access? More access. That's why greater access. All right, by making automatic exceptions. So sharing rules, once they are configured, they will be calculated, they will be recalculated, the entire sharing model will be recalculated, and access to some records will be given based on the rules that have been configured. Okay, and what they make exceptions to, what they make exceptions to the org wide sharing setting that has been configured by default. Okay, sharing rules can never be restrictive. So that means you cannot write a sharing rule and say if this case internal access is public read only, write a sharing rule to make it private. No, you cannot go down. You can always open up access. All right, you cannot reduce the access in in sharing settings. You can only use sharing rules for opening up access. Make sense? Great. So let's talk about the two kinds of sharing rules, right? So you can write something which is owner based, or you can write something that is criteria based. Now understand this use case, understand the examples, it will give you better clarity. Okay, so the first example is, let's say you have some records, so you have some contact records which are owned by a team called UK sales team, United Kingdom sales team. All right, and you want to check if the record that is owned by a specific user, if that user is, let's say, Himanshu. In that case, I want to share all the UK sales team records to APAC sales team. Okay, I think I messed it up. Let's do it again. So let's say that a record is owned by the UK sales team. Let's say that's a queue. Okay, if a record is owned by this particular queue, I want to open up access for the same record to another queue that is called the APAC sales team. So all records of the United Kingdom sales team should be available to the Asia Pacific sales team. So what kind of sharing is this? Owner based sharing. If I own the record, there are three people who should get access to my record. What kind of sharing am I enabling? I'm enabling owner based. Based on who is the owner, I'm defining what kind of sharing I want to configure. Okay, let's look at this on Salesforce. So if I create a new sharing rule on the case level, why am I creating on the case level? Because case is set as private. I should be able to open up access. Now you notice you have a label. So I'll say share cases owned by me. Okay, let's say just by me. You'll notice, see, the rule type has two different options, either by record owner or by criteria. That's the two options we are talking about here. Okay, ignore the third option for now. Just the first two. This is for internal users. Okay, and external users who are community portal users. Okay, now you see, when you choose record owner, you get an option. There is the next step. What does it say? Select which records do you want to share. So I'll say cases that are owned by members of a specific queue. What is that queue? This particular queue. For example, correct? If a case is owned by one of the members of the case assignment queue, share it with a public group, that is basically the accounting team, let's say. Okay, let me do the same example. Basically, let's try to use the same nomenclature so that you get a better idea. So let's create a queue that is UK sales team. So I'll quickly create some queues and public groups so that it is easy to understand. UK sales team, and I'll just enable it for case, and queue members, I'll just add Himanshu here. All right, let's say save. Okay, let's create one more queue, and that queue is called APAC sales team. All right, so let's create APAC sales team queue. I'll remove the extra spaces, and here this will also be for case, and let's say my friend Jeet is in this particular queue. All right, so I have two different queues created now. Let's go back to sharing settings. Let's copy this particular name so that I don't have to type it again. Let's reload. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to say, if a case record is owned by the UK sales team, it should be shared with the APAC sales team. So I'll say UK sales team case sharing. All right, relevant name. I'll say based on the record owner. So case is owned by Q. Which Q? The UK sales team should be shared with the users from. Okay, I don't see the Q of coming up here, which means I cannot share it with queues. I can only share it with roles and public groups. Okay, I think I might have written it somewhere on my notes. So let's create a public group instead of a queue. So I'll create an APAC sales public group. So I'll call it APAC sales team, and I'll just add my friend on this particular list and I'll say save. So a public group is created. What I can now do is I can use this public group. It's not loading up here. I think I have to refresh. So based on record owner, I'll say cases owned by the UK sales team should be accessible to the APAC sales team public group. And see what kind of access do I have available? Since the case access on the org level is private, I can only open up access. I can say either read only or I can give the maximum access, that's called read write. Okay, so I'll say read only and I'll say save. And it will say that I want to do a recalculation because you've created a new sharing rule. I say okay, go ahead. So I've created a sharing rule. All right, and now this sharing rule is created. Now, what does that mean? This means that if Himanshu, who's part of the UK sales team, creates a case, Himanshu will be able to see his case and modify his case. That's it, right? What about the other guy in the other queue or the other public group? Will he be able to see it? If we did not configure the sharing rule, the other guy Jeet would not be able to see it, right? Because the case sharing is private. However, we have configured a sharing rule. What does that sharing rule say? That since the owner of the case record is part of the UK sales team, the case record is being shared with APAC sales team. So anyone who is part of the APAC sales team, meaning the one user that is available, will be able to see the case but will not be able to modify it. Cool. Do you want to see this live in action? Let's see. So let's go back to queues. All right. So as part of UK sales team, Himanshu is the member. All right. And as part of the other public group, which is APAC sales team, this guy is the user, Jeet. All right. Let me just quickly check if this user is active in the system. Let's go to user detail. So the user is active in the system. All right. So let's now do this. Let me create a case record. Okay. So Himanshu will create a case record. So I'll just go ahead and say new. I'll associate it with a contact, with an account. Status is new. Medium is the priority. Case reason is performance. Type is electronic. Origin is from, let's say, phone. And mandatory fields are filled. Let's say save. Okay. It says storage limit exceeded. Let's say cancel. Let's remove this particular record. Okay. I think I should be able to create one new record. Let's say new. I'll associate Brian Dent. All of this is here. Phone, type, case reason, and say save. Somehow the storage limit is exceeded. Let's take a look at how many cases are created. Okay, let me just go ahead and delete some records. So since I'm on a developer edition, I have very limited storage, right? And this is one of the errors that comes up if in case the storage is exceeded, right? So I'll just select ID from case, execute. So there are 5 records. Let's go ahead and say delete these 5 records. I don't want to open log. I'll say execute highlighted. If I refresh the grid, all the 5 records are gone. Let's also delete all the opportunities from the system. Okay. I hope some space has now been emptied or freed. Let's go back and try it out. So I'll go back and I'll say new. Let's try to associate, fingers crossed, save. I still have the same error. Let me quickly check what's happening here. Let's go to setup. I can take a look at storage usage. What's wrong? Let's see. Which one have I exceeded? So storage usage, file storage is at 20 MB and I've already consumed. So let me just go ahead and check what are the files that have been attached. I'll just probably get rid of one of the files or 2 files. Yeah, so I have a lot of files available here, right? So let's get rid of some files. Our storage usage, refresh. Okay, it's at 83%, so we are good to go. Okay, so sorry for the delay. Let's now jump into creating a case record. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this as well. Okay, and now let's create a new case. So now Himanshu is creating a new case. All right, so let's go ahead and say type is electrical, case reason is performance, origin is from email. I'll say save. All right, so case is created. Now who should be able to access it? Himanshu, because he's the owner, and the case org wide setting is private, which means tomorrow if another guy, let's say Lokesh, comes in and tries to look at the record, will he be able to see it? No, because the ownership or the org wide setting is private. If it were public read only, Lokesh would be able to see it, right? But since this is private, no one can see it except the owner, and I'm the owner who has created the record, correct? But now the question arises. Let's take a look at this case. The current owner is Himanshu. Let me just change the ownership to the UK APAC Q. I mean the UK sales team. So if I just change this to UK sales team and I say change owner, now the ownership is in the UK sales team. And this should trigger our sharing rule and it should recalculate the sharing. And now if I log in as Jeet, the other user, I should be able to access this particular case record. Let's see if I can see it or not. Okay, so before doing this, let me do something. Let me remove the sharing rule first of all. Okay, so that you are able to see, okay, the user was not able to see it and now he is able to see it, right? So that's a better way of testing out things. Let's go to sharing settings. Let's go to cases and let's delete our sharing setting. Okay, I'll just go ahead and say edit. Oops. So this one right here, I want to delete it. Okay, I'll just say delete. So right now, if I log in as Jeet, will I be able to see the case? No, I will not be able to see the case because the sharing has been recalculated and the default access is private. So let me try logging in as Jeet and see if I'm able to see the record or not. Okay, let's try to search. So you see, the record is currently not visible. Okay, I don't have any access to the record. But now let's do something. Let's log out as Jeet. And now let's create the sharing rule again. Okay. Based on record owner. If it is owned by the UK sales team, share it with the APAC sales team public group, give them the read-only access. I'll say save. You want to do a recalculation? Go ahead, do it. I don't have any issues with that. So a sharing rule has been created and it has been recalculated because I don't see the message on top. Now let's go back and try to log in as Jeet one more time. Right, this guy right here, let's log in. So if I try to search, I'm still not able to see it. Now there might be a problem on the metadata level settings, right? So let's log out from here. Let's log back in as Salesforce administrator. And I think the user or the profile that's associated to this user should have the read access on the object level for the org-wide sharing to work, correct? So the metadata level setting, the underlying metadata settings have to be configured first. So let's do that. The underlying object permissions and field level permissions need to be configured. On top of that, these things will work, correct? So let's go back. Let's check what profile is this guy assigned. So you'll see that Jeet is assigned the planogram designer profile. Now, what is this profile? This is of the Salesforce platform type license. Let's take a look at the object settings, okay? And let's see if the cases are available. If I take a look at the object here, I cannot even access the cases, all right? Because that's a limitation with the Salesforce platform license. So let's look at the standard user. What license is this user? This is the Salesforce license, right? So let's look at the standard user profile, or let's take a look at this profile for our use case. Okay. So let's go to standard user profile and let's look at the object settings and let's see if cases are available. So cases are available and you have the read, create and edit option. Let's do something. Let's add this guy to the public group. Okay. Let's open the public group APAC sales team. And let's add one more user which is of the standard user license. So I'll just go ahead and say users and I'll just add Shinji. Okay, let's say save. Perfect. Now let's log in as Shinji and see if the case is accessible to us or not because of the sharing rule. All right, let's go to user detail and let's log in. All right, if I take a look at the case, you see the case is accessible to me. All right, but see, let's look at the case. The case is accessible, and if I try to, let's say, modify and I try to say save, it says, oops, you don't have the necessary privileges to edit the record. Why? The reason is your org-wide settings is private, and on top of that, you have been given a public read-only sharing access on the sharing rule level. So write access or edit access to someone else's record is not available, which is why you're only able to see it, but you cannot touch or modify it. Make sense? Let's look at one more scenario. Let's log out as Shinje. You were able to see the record, right? Now let's remove the sharing rule. Let's see if the record is available or not. So the sharing rule will be clear, right? Let's remove the sharing rule and log in again and see if the access is still available. So I'll just go ahead and delete the sharing rule. Done. I'll just say delete. Yep, it's done. It is trying to recalculate the sharing. I'll refresh it one more time and it's done. Now let's log in again as Shinje. And once we log in, we should not have access to the case record anymore. So I'm logged in as Shinje, and if I try to search the record, you see the record is no more visible. All right, so you don't see the record anymore. The cases list is 0. So that's how sharing rules work. Does that make sense? I know we took a very long route of understanding just one small thing, but I think it is helpful. Everything that you see on the screen, everything that you see me fix is helpful, right? Storage limit exceeded, so I cleared up the storage. I took a look at what was exceeding. I was first deleting records, but my file storage was exceeded. So I deleted some files and then we were able to empty the org recycle bin, and we got some free storage. Then I was trying to access a user who did not have the case object access at all. Why? Because that user was of the profile which was from the Salesforce platform license. So that means Salesforce platform license users don't have access to certain objects, one of which is case, right? Which is why we shifted to a new user. But not just shifting would work, we added that user to the public group. As soon as we added that user to the public group, the sharing rule was recalculated and that user got access to the case, right? But that user did not get access entirely. That user was only able to see the case because that's the only access we opened up. Because it was a private sharing, we said that it can be public read only, but not read write, which is why when I tried to edit it as Shinje, I got an error. Okay, I don't have the necessary privileges. And those privileges come from where? They come from the sharing settings, they come from the sharing rules, they come from the org wide defaults, they come from the role hierarchy, right? So anytime you see this error, oops, you don't have the necessary privileges, you can be sure that this is something to do with sharing, some part of it. All right, so that was sharing rule. And as soon as we removed the sharing setting, the sharing rule, the user lost access entirely because the default internal access is private. And if it is private, only the person who has created the record will be able to see it, no one else. All right, so that was all about record based or owner based sharing rules, right? Owner based. Now, if you take a look at the sharing rules one more time, let's get rid of all the other tabs. Let's refresh this one more time. If you take a look at the sharing rule that we created, or let's create one more, what are the possible options available? You can check the ownership of what kind of people. You can check public group, you can check queues, you can check roles, you can check portal subordinates also. So all the roles are available here. All right. And who can you share it with? See, we cannot share it with queues, right? We cannot share it with queues because the queues option is available to choose which records, but it's not available to whom to share it with. All right. So we can only share it with public groups, roles, internal, and portal. Okay. And what kind of access can we give? We can only open up access on top of the access given on the OWD level. That was based on record owner. A lot of things are similar based on criteria. The only thing is instead of the ownership, you get to choose a criteria. That's all. You see, the share with option is same, the access option is same. It's just that you can choose what criteria do you want to define. Instead of who is the record owner, you can choose a specific criteria. Meaning, let's take an example. Share the records that are with the IT public group if department field is set to IT. Meaning, if the field case, let's take a random option, web company equals IT. In that case, share it with the public group, that is the APAC sales team. Make sense? Can you add multiple criteria? Yes, you can say if the case origin equal to, you can get a pick list option because it is a pick list. So I'll say it is either phone or email. In that case, share it with a role. Which role? Let's say share it with the chairman. Can be done. Okay. Let's say you don't want to say and, you want to say either or. You can simply click on add filter logic and you can just say one or two. Can be done. Okay, let's say you have added 5 filters, you want to add the sixth filter, you can simply say add row and you can add 6 filters. Set up your filter logic and sharing will work based on the logic that you've added. Make sense? That is your based on criteria option. All right, so I'm not going deep dive into the criteria base. It is pretty much same as the owner based sharing. You can give it a try. All right, a quick note, how many sharing rules can be defined in total for an object? A maximum of 300 sharing rules can be defined. Okay, but out of which criteria based rules can only be 50, maximum 50. You cannot go beyond 50. What does that tell you? That tells you you can create a maximum of 250 record owned based and 50 criteria based. All right, so that was all about sharing rules. Try this probably with one or two users. Try to create rules for two or three different objects, and then also try to see by logging in just how I logged in with the user and try to see the record, find the record, edit the record, change the record. Correct? Try to do those kind of exercises and you'll be able to figure out what sharing settings is or what sharing rule is, not sharing settings. Okay? If you need more use cases, if you need practice examples, if you want some specific use cases that Imanshu, can you show me actual real-time example of let's say three different profiles trying to access four different type of records? Can you show me a very nice sharing setting based on three or four different conditions? I can do that. I just need a comment if you need it. All right. So that's sharing rules. And next we'll jump into the next part of opening up access, which is manual sharing.